Hello and welcome to Cultural Wealth Wednesdays. I'm thrilled you joined us today for what I believe will be a transformative conversation about recognizing, honoring, and leveraging the incredible assets that exist within our diverse communities. I'm Dr. Crystal L. Clemens, founder and CEO of Our Village Consulting, and I've dedicated over 15 years of my career to a simple but powerful belief. Every student, every family, and every community possesses incredible wealth that, when recognized and cultivated, can transform educational outcomes. As someone who has spent my career in school counseling and counselor education, I've witnessed firsthand how traditional deficit-based thinking can limit our vision of what's possible. But I've also seen the magic that happens when we shift our perspective to recognize the cultural wealth that surrounds us every day. Cultural Wealth Wednesdays is our weekly space to explore, celebrate, and learn how to leverage the diverse forms of capital that exist in our communities, what researcher Tara Yasso calls community cultural wealth. We're talking about the aspirational capital that drives families to dream big for their children, the linguistic capital found in multilingual households, the familial capital that creates strong support networks, the social capital built through community connections, the navigational capital that helps families persist through challenges, and the resistant capital that emerges from communities advocating for change. Each Wednesday, we'll dive deep into practical strategies for identifying cultural wealth in your school or community, building authentic partnerships that honor diverse perspectives, creating programming that builds on existing community assets, challenging systems that perpetuate deficit thinking, and developing your own cultural competence as an educator or leader. Cultural Wealth Wednesdays isn't just about changing how we think. It's about changing how we act. It's about building the kind of inclusive, asset-based educational communities where every child can thrive. So let's begin this journey together. Let's challenge ourselves to see wealth where others might see deficits. Let's build bridges where others might see barriers. Let's create the villages our children deserve. Greetings. Welcome back to another Cultural Wealth Wednesday. Today we are talking about linguistic capital, okay? And we're exploring all the ways that linguistic capital functions as cultural wealth. How does it help leaders leverage communication assets to build a more inclusive, effective, and innovative organization and environment? And so in the cultural wealth model, linguistic capital, that usually includes intellectual, social skills attained through communication experiences in multiple languages, and often also communication styles. But here's the thing, traditional approaches often see linguistic diversity as a challenge that we need to manage rather than the cultural wealth asset that we need to leverage. Me being an educator, I'm going to bring in my education experience here. Working in schools, we often have students who are categorized as ESL, right? English or ELL, English language learners. And generally, when we look at these students and they're coming to us and English is not their first language, we tend to think, oh, what do they need? We need to help them. They don't know English. They are behind. When the truth is, these students who know multiple languages are actually the smartest students in your classroom. But because of the way society has framed English-speaking folks and folks who don't speak English, we tend to think from a deficit lens. So cultural wealth, then, it helps us recognize that multilingual capabilities, cultural communication competencies, and the ability to even navigate different linguistic contexts, those are sophisticated intellectual assets. When partners and your students and your employees and leaders and all these people can code switch between different communication styles, that means they can translate. And they're translating complex concepts across cultural frameworks, or they're facilitating an understanding between diverse groups. That is cultural wealth in action, and we need to recognize it as that. Some folks who are watching this may not be familiar with the term code switch. And for that, I say this. Code switching is when we speak one way or speak one language in one environment, and then when we enter another environment, we have to switch our code, we have to switch our language, we have to switch our communication styles to fit the other environment that we're in. Usually, if you're not familiar with code switching, oftentimes it's because you haven't had to do it. Okay, so let's think about the department manager who grew up in a rural community and can translate the corporate policies, the technical jargon to those folks in the field who may not understand all that complicated stuff. What that's doing is that's easing tensions between higher ups and your folks who are on the ground, right? That helps to prevent misunderstandings, that helps to bridge the cultural context, and that also just helps to eliminate any issues that may come up, again, between the higher ups and those with the boots on the ground. So let's think also about the young employee who understands communication styles and traditional business language. She becomes the unofficial translator in generational conflicts, helping the older supervisors understand why younger workers prefer a different feedback style. She can help the younger employees understand and navigate traditional organizational hierarchy. Now, I will say this. There's a tendency in society to brand Gen Z, Gen Alpha language, speech, jargon, slang as just that. Gen Z, Gen Alpha, whatever. When the truth is, the slang is not Gen Z. The slang is not Gen Alpha. What the slang actually is black and brown queer slang. So spilling the tea, throwing shade, clock it, all of those things are a product of minoritized communities creating their own language and their own meaning. It became mainstream, and so now folks, instead of attributing it to this actual origin, what we have done, what society has done, has attributed it to the young folks, when truthfully the young folks got it, again, from black and brown queer folks. And by the way, that speech is not new. Terms like throwing shade and spilling tea and all of that, that's been around since the 80s, maybe even the 70s. So when we talk about language and we talk about linguistic capital, it's important to understand the actual origins of such language and why such language has even come about in the first place. Most organizations, schools, communities, they underutilize their linguistic cultural wealth. So think about it. In your place, in your organization, in your school, what languages are represented among your folks? What cultural communication competencies exist? What translation and interpretation capabilities are available? What community connections are possible through linguistic assets? Right? Don't just stop thinking with language. Don't just end there. Also think about sophisticated communication competencies, right? Which is the ability to translate technical concepts for diverse audiences, navigate generational communication differences, adapt communication styles for various folks, and to facilitate understanding across cultural frameworks. Linguistic capital is not just verbal communication, it's also nonverbal communication. There's a clip of a reboot of the TV show Password, and it's a game show for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. All I'm going to say is Google Password, Yvette Nicole Brown, and Keke Palmer. And there is a beautiful clip of a nonverbal communication between the two of them that is just phenomenal. Please go watch it. It's amazing. Just go see it. One thing that you might want to do is create some sort of systemic documentation of the linguistic cultural assets that you have in your space. So think about your multilingual staff, your multilingual students, if you're in a school, multilingual families, employees, whatever. They're not just individual contributors, though. They're institutional resources, and they all represent cultural wealth. Your community members who can navigate different communication strategies are strategic assets. They are assets for partner engagement. Your team members who can translate between the technical and public audiences are really, really valuable for external relations and internal knowledge transfer. And until you start to see that, you're going to be the hamster on the wheel, wondering why your communication is off, wondering why your words aren't translating. It's because you're not using the cultural wealth that you have at your fingertips and at your disposal. So now you're probably thinking, okay, well, I understand what linguistic capital is. I understand why it's important and how it's valuable. How do I cultivate it in my space? Glad you asked. So first, hire and promote with linguistic cultural wealth in mind. In diverse communities or global markets, multilingual capabilities and cultural communication competencies should be valued assets in personnel decisions, not just nice to have additions. Also, think about investing in language and linguistic development in a strategic manner. So this could look like language training for key leaders, cultural competency development for teams that serve diverse communities, or even communication skills training that help technical experts share knowledge across different audiences. So you should be treating these as infrastructure investments and not individual perks. Next, you should be creating systems for linguistic knowledge sharing and cultural wealth preservation. Develop some protocols for translation and interpretation that honor linguistic expertise. Create mentorship relationships that transfer cultural communication competencies. Build that institutional memory and those systems that capture and preserve these linguistic cultural assets. Finally, you should develop inclusive communication practices that leverage rather than suppress linguistic diversity. This means creating meeting norms that welcome different communication styles, developing materials that serve multilingual communities, and building feedback systems that capture diverse perspectives on organizational communication effectiveness. Let's address the elephant in the room. There is linguistic bias in this country, in this society. Organizations, schools, all of the above, they tend to give privilege to certain communication styles, accents, and linguistic patterns while devaluing others. So I'm going to be a little bit more clear. The King's English gets the top priority. The King's English is privileged. The King's English is preferred. That means anybody who speaks anything other than the King's English, even if they speak it in a strong Southern drawl, or if they speak Ebonics, if they speak Patois, if they speak Spanglish, if they speak any form of English other than the King's English, with any other accent other than a straight accent that folks can quote unquote understand, folks who speak in that manner tend to be devalued. Their pattern of speech tends to be diminished. They tend to be looked down upon, and they tend to get some sort of consequence, negative consequence, for speaking in their natural way. This is not just unfair, it is strategically counterproductive because it is wasteful. It wastes cultural wealth. Cultural wealth approaches recognize that communication differences also often mean thinking differences that drive innovation. The team member who communicates differently may also process information differently, bringing perspectives that enhance the problem solving. The community member who needs interpretation services may also represent market opportunities and cultural insights. Build linguistic inclusion systematically. Train your leadership teams to recognize and interrupt accent bias, communication privilege, and linguistic discrimination. Create organizational norms that value clarity and effectiveness over conformity to narrow communication standards. Develop policies that demonstrate institutional commitment to linguistic cultural wealth. Remember that building linguistic cultural capital, it requires resource investment. Don't expect your multilingual folks to just provide informal translation services without recognition and compensation. Invest in professional interpretation and translation infrastructure and create career pathways that reward linguistic cultural wealth appropriately. Most importantly, model linguistic humility as a leadership practice. Acknowledge when you need linguistic support. Demonstrate curiosity about different communication styles and create organizational culture where linguistic diversity is celebrated as a strategic asset. All right, it is time for our cultural Wealth Wednesday challenge. So your challenge for this week is to identify one way your organization could better leverage linguistic cultural wealth for mutual benefit. How might communication assets create value for both your partners and for your institutional goals? So that's it for today. Thank you for joining me on this week's Cultural Wealth Wednesday on Linguistic Capital. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for future episodes where we are exploring all 6 forms of cultural wealth in leadership, in organizations, and education. Thank you for joining me.